All right. Well, welcome everybody to the first Zoom Q&A meeting for the OSU PDC Pro for spring 2022. And thank you very much, everyone, for making time to join the meeting today. And today is going to be pretty relaxed. We're just going to have an introduction to the platform. I thought that would be helpful for most people, just to run through some of the easy ways to navigate it. And then we're going to look at the first assignment, which is pretty straightforward, but we'll take a peek at that. And I'll probably talk a little bit about things to consider for your site, your project site selection. And yeah, so maybe what I'll do is actually just share screen here, and we'll bring up the OSU platform. There we go. And we've got, we'll have some time a little bit later to look at any questions people might have. So no problem there. All right. So I'm sure this looks familiar. Your screen is probably going to look a little bit different. There's probably more menu choices here for instructors than there is for students. But what I would suggest, there's a few things. It actually took me a couple of years to get used to this platform when I first started working for OSU. I guess it was about 5 years ago. So I'll try and show you a few things that I've learned in that time. One here is, of course, all of the work that you're going to do and post will be in the discussion boards. Okay, so if we click on that menu, we're going to look at the various lessons. So let's just go to lesson number 1. And for the instructors, we choose which group we're going to here. But so here I am. And the nice thing about the way this is set up is once you get into the group and you click the discussion heading at the top of the page, you will get all of the discussion boards. So that's something that I'm sure will help most of you. We have a help discussion board, which please do post anything that comes up that you'd like answered. I keep my eye on that. I'm not on this every day, but I do check it a lot during the week. So the other thing that's interesting is we have an open thread discussion board. So if there's anything that you want to talk about with other students, you know, that's permaculture related, it's not necessarily a question, you know, this is a great place to post it. Here is where all of the Q&A Zoom links are going to go. So at the end of today's meeting, I will put I'll put this video onto my YouTube channel, and we will post it right in here. So this is a resource for everybody to, well, for 2 resources. One is to access the Google document that we have, and there we've got some questions already. So we're going to take a look at that a bit later. And I do encourage everybody, if you do have questions going into today's Q&A Zoom meeting, this is a great place to put them, in part because some of the questions may take me a little bit of preparation. You know, mostly no, but it might happen. And these questions will get priority during the call. So if we do run short of time, you know, that could be a little bit of factor, but honestly, we want to answer all your questions. So regardless, we'll do everything we can to get to that. We have the meeting link, which you all know about, and I'll probably below here put all the dates for all the meetings, and that way it's easy to reference. But generally speaking, I'll send out a note the week before, maybe Thursday or Friday, about the Monday meeting, just as a reminder. And if we go back here, then Milo has his. So Milo is a new instructor. I've known Milo for a number of years. He's a younger fellow that is very talented market gardener and as well as instructor. So he's got his own Zoom Q&A link discussion board. And we are sharing all these other discussion boards here. So of course, there's the introduction and then the first assignment. And then as we get closer to each assignment, I pin these up top here, so they're always easy to access. So that's very, very sort of basic navigation to the discussion board. I don't know if anybody has any questions about that. I think this is fairly straightforward. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into the course. So here we go again. We're at that entry point. And one thing that's really interesting here that many of you may want to check out is this tab right here under modules. So if we click on that, there's a lot of information sitting in here. And there are a few things that there's a few things that are instructor only that you won't see on your sheet or your web browser. But there are a few items within the resource section that might interest you. One is the student sample reports. So if you go there should be, I think, 4 different examples. And these are great to take a look at if you are wondering about how others are putting together their work and what's been included. So I would encourage you to take a peek at that. The other thing that I find super interesting for those who want to consider doing this for a career, whether at part-time or full-time, is at the bottom here, we have the client interface. And here we've got Andrew, and we've got myself, and Kelda, and Neil. And each person here is going to walk you through their design process from the beginning of a project right up until the end. So this is really worth taking a look at. I find it fascinating to see what other people's processes are. And of course, everybody's in a slightly different context with their projects, but you may find this super helpful if you're planning on taking this information and designing for others in the future. So we'll go back here. There's also the Natural Capital Plant Database that you have access to. This is a very rich resource, and I would highly recommend people diving into that. There's a few tutorials. So there's a lot of info just in that resource section. And then it's broken out into the different lessons and introductions to that, the learning materials, and the assignments itself. So this is a nice page to reference at different times during the course. The other things that are of use here, well, there's the syllabus. And that can answer any questions you have specifically about each lesson. But let us go back, go to the discussion board, and we'll go to that first assignment. And a few people have already placed their assignments in there, which is great. So a few things up here, it'll always say the due date up in the top right corner. So that's next Monday. And what we do is we have 2 classes going at once. So we have today I'm grading papers for lesson 6 for the winter class, and it's alternating. So next Monday it's you guys, and then of course the Q&As, the same thing. We're alternating those. So every Monday I have a Q&A. It's just with a different class. A few things to take note of here is you definitely want to download the PDC Pro template file. And then when you do so, you're going to want to go under File, and you'll want to make your own copy of the entire presentation. And then you would call it, you would name it something. You know, you could put your name at the front here, and then save it to your drive. Okay, and this is really the hub of all your work. I'm not going to bother doing that, but this is the raw template file. There are, let me just see here. You'll notice that within the file, all these blue bits are tutorials or information relating to each sheet. So it's been really well set up. Before, we kind of had a very rough template file, and then we had a separate instruction sheet. So this really has gone a long way to combine all that information into one place. And these may be links to videos, they may be links to just instructions. Often there is some examples on the same sheet, but these are pretty self-explanatory. So the first lesson is just really the personal survey. And at the beginning here, we do have some information on how to fill all this in. So that first page of the template, you know, how to make a copy, how to share it, how to navigate it, how to fill in, you know, the yellow text, because this is kind of a master point at the top here that'll just repeat as you go through. So you definitely want to consider that. So this is a real key part of the whole course, and I would highly recommend using that. Let us see. So we can just go through some of the basic stuff with this lesson. Again, it's very, very easy, and you'll find that we're gonna kind of ramp up a little bit over the next 5 weeks, and then we'll have a little break, a couple of weeks through the summer. Sorry, yeah, it'll be through the summer, and then we'll be starting back up again, I believe. I might be getting my dates mixed up here. April, yeah, so in June we have a little break. But in this first section, again, it's just touching on your personal survey, you know, a little bit about yourself, what you're hoping to do with the course. And, you know, you may not know all these answers, and the answers may change as you go through the course. But it does give us a little bit of it gives everybody a nice snapshot of where you're coming from. And then we're going to look at the design site itself. And there is a link here that has some good information on it, some guidelines about choosing the design site. And I would say the only thing that I would, the big thing that I see come up in some of the course, some of the students' work is occasionally we'll get somebody that will choose, say, a 5-acre site, just as an example, and then they'll really only want to look at a very small section of that. So I would encourage you all to try and embrace the entire site, the entire property boundary of whatever project site it is, whether it's urban or large acreage. And the reason I say that is we're really, you know, permaculture design is really looking at the whole and trying to make the best use of all your resources. So if you are just let's use the 5-acre example as an analogy. If you use just a half acre of that as your project site, there may be resources within the 5 acres that you could utilize, but you're not going to be able to with the constraints of your project site boundary. So that's really the only thing I would throw out there. And that this happens a little bit because people do get and understandably they'll get a little bit nervous about having to design a large space, when the reality, my experience is, it's actually much harder to design small spaces. So when we get to these larger farm and broad acreage, it's easier in a lot of ways. So don't get intimidated by that. We're not having to design every square centimeter. So there may be really intense portions of the design space, and there may be others that are, almost untouched, right? So if you had 50 acres and 20 of it was a wooded area that's untouched, well, that's a huge resource, but it's obviously something you're not going to want to be probably messing with. So yeah, you can go through this section on the design site and just take a look at, again, that link is really helpful. I have had students do rooftops of apartment buildings. That's tricky too, definitely tricky. So you can apply permaculture to design to all of these different potential project sites, also to public parks. I've had a number of students take public parks and design within that, and so there are lots of opportunities. If you don't have a site in mind, there are a lot of potential places that you might want to consider. You just want to make sure that you're able to visit the site. And in in lesson 6, we will be taking soil samples and doing percolation tests. So you'd want to feel comfortable about doing that. And in a public park, that might be kind of tricky, but it also could be doable. So let's see here. So we have the design site Indigenous land acknowledgement section, and then a very basic map of the design site, just showing its location within the world, within the country, and then we're kind of zooming into the state or province, as well as the specific location. And this, again, is quite general. The next lesson, so 2 weeks time, or I guess it'd be 3 weeks time, will be actually creating the base map. So that'll be a lot more specific. We'll be asking for really specific details within that, and we'll have a Q&A meeting prior to that. So we're not going to go too far into it today, but just to let you know that this is fairly general. And if you want, we can actually look at an example here. So personal survey. So here's a design site. There's also a climate survey, but we're going to get to that, and that's very important. And so you can see this is, it's a world view, Canada as it's a country view, and then the province of British Columbia, and then dialing right into the city, in this example, city of Courtenay, and then the design site itself with a rough property boundary. And then this is a nice addition where we're putting in some on-site images and specifying where those are located on the site itself and what direction they're pointing. And then there's a little Q&A here. And again, after that, we're also looking at the climate survey. So this is quite general, but it's still a very important little resource that we're going to be pulling from as we go through the course, especially when we get to that water layer, as I would call it, or that lesson on water in week 5. So when you're filling this in, a couple of key items that you're going to want to consider, and I'm just looking to see where they are listed here. I don't see it. So you want your average annual rainfall for the year, and that's, that's specified. But the other thing you want to try and find out is that record 24-hour rain event. And that can be a little bit tricky to find, but it is worth locating that. So this student did not place that in, but that is definitely, that is part of the template file itself, which we can go to here. And you'll see that this is being arranged slightly different. So that's one thing about some of the student examples. They're based on the first version of the template file, and it's been modified slightly. So we haven't updated that. But if we go to the climate survey here, there we are. So these are a couple of really interesting and critical measurements you're going to want to get: average annual rainfall and extreme daily rainfall event. And I would try with both of these, if you're in an area where there isn't an airport or weather station nearby, you may have some challenges finding that info out. But what you want to do, if you can't find it specific to your area, is just look for the closest weather station and get at least close to what the actual is. Same with the extreme daily event, because when we get to lesson 5, we are going to be thinking about how much rainfall is hitting our site in this sort of potential extreme event and how we might manage that. So that is critical data to have, in my opinion. And I must say I'm a little bit biased. If you go through the examples that I showed you a little earlier with the 4 instructors, how they do all their design processes, you'll see that everybody's going to have sort of a different deliverable. And when I do a design for somebody, it is not it does not include all the information that is within the template file. That is that's an enormous document, but it's a great way of being introduced to this type of design process. And you'll probably find, as you modify for your own use, if you're planning to do this beyond the course, that you have specific things that you really dial into. And water is something that we look at first when we do a design. We have water, access, and soil for urban designs, and we do farm design as well, and that's a very different process, and I'm not going to get into that right now. That uses the Agrarian platform, which is somewhat permaculture, but it's different. Happy to talk about that at a later date. And let's see here. So that looks at the design site itself, and then we touched on the climate survey. You'll notice with the discussion board, these are great resources here. So they're going to tell you a little bit about what's required in the assignment, and then there's an assignment resource tab. So there'll be tutorial videos, there'll be links that can help people out. And this is also a really good place to check in, and that is the rubric. So when I go to mark any assignments, this is what I use as a reference. So if you take a look at the rubric and you include everything that's been asked for, you'll have a perfect mark, right? If you don't include certain things, then I have to mark accordingly. But if you felt that you didn't that you want to change your assignment after it's been graded, I'm happy to look at it again and adjust your mark. So some people really enjoy doing that. They want to get everything perfect, and that's completely fine. And others are just happy to keep going with knowing, learning from what they've done in the prior assignment. So either way works. Let's see here. Okay, and a little bit about my process. What I generally will do, I do this a little different than some of the other instructors. I for the first assignment, which is lesson 1, I'll provide you very brief written feedback on that, right? And when we go from lesson 2 to lesson 10, what I do is I will provide you with video feedback. So I'll have your assignment on my screen and be able to reference it as I provide some comments and feedback. And then I'll post that, I'll embed it into the discussion board so you can easily view it, and it'll always be there because you have access to the course for lifetime, or at least as long as all the servers are running. So that the feedback will always be there. You can reference. I find I prefer to do that to typing. Now, for some of you, you may find that you really like to have the feedback in a written format, and just let me know. And I'm happy to do that for you, because I used to do that for everybody, but I've discovered that the video feedback is just way easier, and I'm very visual. And I think a lot of the students appreciate the video feedback, but I'm again happy to modify what I do to suit you best. So far nobody has asked for written feedback specifically, but I'm totally open to that. So please feel free if that is best for you. And let me see here. That is lesson 1 that I think we've covered off quite well. Okay. Now, maybe what we should do, just before I get into the Q&A part here, is just see if anybody has any questions at all about what we've covered. No? Okay. That sounds good. Well, let us take a look at Q&A document that was on that discussion board. So we have, so question. Now, ideally, when we put a question, we want to know who you are and where you are from. And this person didn't indicate that, but that's no big deal. We're going to still answer. Oh, Ruben, there you go. You're having a hard time finding Google Earth. Okay, well, I'll start Google Earth up. Now, you may find when you're...
It's not necessarily Google Earth. I think it's something to do with the Mac. I just was curious if anyone uses on the Mac. It doesn't have lat long or altitude in the corner, and the layers work differently.
Do you use the browser-based version, or are you using Google Earth
The
Pro?
downloaded, the version.
Okay.
It's just I was wondering if you've used the Mac before, because it doesn't. The altitude is the problem.
Yeah, no problem there. I'm going to fire up Google Earth Pro here and just give you a quick walkthrough on that. There are a few tutorials within the course on Google Earth Pro, but probably not a huge amount. Let me just fire this up. I've got a lot of stuff on my Google Earth.
Do you have a Mac?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then specifically, if you look on the bottom, my question, I took 2 images. Specifically, it said if you turn on the layers, then you get your altitude and it says 0. But they said if you turn on layers, then that works. That's on, but it still says 0. So I was wondering what yours looks like.
Okay, well, let's just, here, I'll go to a property we're designing here. I'll take that off. There we go. So a couple of quick things here with Google Earth. If you're over the site and you want to take a screenshot and place this in your discussion board and you tap the U key, you'll go directly 2D overhead. And that's critical because if you zoom in and out and move around a bit, it's always shifts off of overhead. Okay, so the U key is a brilliant little trick. And then let's say we were in that position and we want to make one thing with mapping, and it's kind of a standard for the landscape industry and many other industries, is we always want north up. So if you want to get north up on Google, you just press N. Right, so boom, you're north, and then you press U and you're directly overhead. And you know, that's super helpful. There are a few other tricks you can do here under the view menu, which you may not be seeing, but under the Google Pro view menu, here, I'm gonna just change the way I'm sharing this, and that way you'll see it. You can see my desktop. All right. If you are on Google Earth Pro, you go under view, you'll see there's a grid. And if you tap grid, we'll go a little further out, you start getting latitude and longitude lines. So that's nice. When you're at the macro, that's great. I'm not sure why these are displaying these different numbers here. It looks like more like time zones. Maybe part of my settings. Let's take that off. We'll go back to that. So U and N. Now, if I just place my cursor on the project site, the bottom right corner, I'm getting an elevation of 44 meters. Okay, so that's, Ruben, that's how you'd find your elevation. Now, I'm not sure why my settings are set up that way. If you go under preferences, so I'm on universal transverse Mercator, and that's because I've been taking information from QGIS and putting it into Google Earth. You'll probably be on degrees, minutes, seconds. You
So
can
I
change.
figured it out. Yours had the thing that said checked, it said status bar, and that's where it's displayed.
Okay.
Yours was checked, mine was.
So here you go. I'm on degrees, minutes, seconds, and beside the imagery date, now I'm getting my latitude, longitude, as well as the elevation. And the elevation of from where your projection is too. We're a kilometer above. So that's kind of a quick and dirty with with Google Earth. Let's go back to your question here. So did we cover off the first one here for you, Ruben? Yeah, okay. So your second question, how accurate do you want your base mount? That is a very good question. So,
And like, do you plan it for what they are or what they will be, right? So like what level are you,
yeah, no, that's a really good question, and everybody's going to have a different approach to this. So if I take a look at the student example and we go to the base map section here, you'll see that this student has taken a Google Earth image and created a base map from that, right? Now, if you were doing this for a client, you'd probably not be using Google Earth because it's not accurate, really, right? It's kind of accurate, not accurate enough for myself, but it's for this class, it's a perfect way to get a snapshot of your project site and get some of the details in. So some people will create a base map, not even like this. They'll put the structures in and then they'll just leave everything somewhat as is. And I wouldn't recommend that, because you're going to find that your base map is a critical part of everything you're going to do for the next 9 weeks. And the better it is, the easier a time you're going to have. So if you kind of rush and kind of have a minimalist base map, you may find you have to upgrade it as you go along. So if you end up with something like this, right, whether it's hand-drawn, and that's completely fine. If you do not want to deal with the computer, there's no problem doing a hand-drawn base map at all. In fact, I encourage people to go that route if, you know, because you don't want to spend most of the course learning a new software, right? And for instance, the software I use for design work, you know, I've used it over 20 years and it took me over a year to learn. And I still don't know it all. I don't need to know it all, but we really want you to focus on the design process rather than the map, you know, the CAD, we'll call it CAD portion of it. So just, I see you have your hand up, Ruben, and I'm gonna come back to here. With regards to trees, you can just, like they've done here, existing trees. That's great. You may have an acreage site with acres and acres of trees. You don't have to draw every individual tree. You could actually even just do a little cloud and say existing Douglas fir forest or existing mixed forest or alder or whatever it happened to be, right?
What if you just put in, let's say like you just planted a, you know, whatever, an apple tree and it's relatively small, but
mhm.
would you put it in the drawing as what it is now, what it is in 3 years, what it is in 8, you know, like when it reaches full size, like what would you put in the drawing for that?
Yeah, for a base map, if you're showing existing, you'd want to try and replicate as closely as you can the on-site existing conditions. So if you have a baby apple tree, you would show it as being quite small, but you would know, depending on the rootstock, if it's a standard rootstock, it's going to become, you know, quite a large tree down the road. So you would have that in the back of your mind as you're going forward. Now, when we get to actually designing, you know, later in week 8, 9, and 10, when we're really dialing into populating your map or you're adding layers, then you would definitely want to show plants at that mature size. So, you know, what is that? Well, that could be, you know, what you think that plant's going to be in 10 years, right? And I tend to go with sort of standardized, like certain plants I know will get 5 foot, 6 foot wide. Now they may get 7 foot, you know, you have no idea. They could be more like 5 or 4. They might not thrive the same way you think they will, but you use the best knowledge you have and the information you have access to determine that. But on your base map, it's really a snapshot of what's happening on the site in this moment as best you can. So driveways, pathways, structure, utilities, right? Where's the power coming in, the fence, If there's any fencing, what about water and septic or sewer? There's, these things, because for obvious reasons, if say on an acreage site you had a septic field, well, you'd want to locate that so you're not designing something on top of it. You would not want to put it in jeopardy. So the utilities are really important. I see I got a couple more questions here. So Ruben asked, what software do I use? I use Vectorworks Landmark and the current version. So it's 2022 right now. And you can download a free version of that and try it out. I will say it's pretty deep. It's a deep rabbit hole learning it. But if you are doing, I was super lucky way back. So 25 years ago, when I started doing design work, I bought what was then called MiniCAD, and it was what I thought was the best approach for a CAD software. And I'm very lucky today. It's I've stuck with it, and it's now Vectorworks. It used to be called MiniCAD, and nothing's perfect, but it does some amazing work. It does 3D modeling. You can do site modeling. There's a lot of interesting things you can do with it. You can couple it with another software called Twinmotion for 3D animation and graphical enhancement, but you again need to have a pretty robust computer when you start getting into that. That's the downside of all of this software, is I have to spend $8,000 on a computer. So that's Canadian. But that's the downside. The upside is, you can, because I use 3 different softwares, using QGIS, it's amazing what the information you can extract out of LiDAR imagery. So it's really fun, and that's very helpful with farm design, bigger space design, because often these resources are available for free. And where I live, there's a lot of available LiDAR imagery. You just need to be able to convert it and make it usable. Next question from Autumn. What is software use clients if not Google Earth? Okay. I think I just
same question.
Yeah, I just explained that. We probably don't have time today, but maybe in the next couple of Q&As, I can show you a little bit about the software. If you go on that client interface section under modules, so and the resources and client interface, where everybody's talking about their process. And if you go through my video, you'll see Vectorworks Landmark there and the kind of deliverables that it puts out. You won't see QGIS or Twinmotion in that video. Those are for basically different types of projects. But yeah, you can really do an incredible amount with the computer to try and, because it's all visualization. You're trying to show somebody what this could look like, and all these tools that you get just make it a little bit easier. And I can't draw, so I've got artists in my family, but I did not cultivate that, so I have to rely on the computer to do my work. Let's go back to that Q and there we are. Okay, so that was all about the base map. So the accuracy. So Ruben, do you think your project site is an urban site, or would it be acreage?
Oh no, mine's an urban site.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So what I showed you with the student
You
example.
answered the question.
Yeah.
Because my question was like, I have a ton of trees that I've planted, and I know what they will be, right? But they know what they are. So like, what do I, that was the question.
Yeah. Well, it's a good question, and it's something that might rear its head a little bit for you as you go through the process, because whenever we're taking on a design, we are doing site analysis, and part of that is figuring out what's on the site and how we're going to integrate all that. And sometimes all those existing significant plants, we'll go through and we'll designate they're either going to be removed, they would be moved and retained to a new location, or they would be retained as is. So that's often what we do with tree and shrubs that are existing. And we do our best to work with things the way they are. And some things, if somebody says, oh, I love this, I have to have it and don't move it. Well, you have that constraint and you have to work around that. But the driving force, in my opinion, is water. So that's why personally, after we create a base map, we look at that water layer. So what are the resources on the site and how can we best utilize them? And then we'll build the soft landscape around that. Right. So it's completely different to traditional, say, landscape architecture, where you go in and you would impose your will, pretty much. And we've done that plenty of times before we got into permaculture. And it just costs lots of money, and you're fighting against the site, and it's just not a good way to go. So, but some people do want that as well. Some clients are going to say, hey, this is what I want. And we had a client who, beautiful waterfront property, and they had a pond on the forest side of the house. It was kind of a little bit of a wetland. Not a wetland, but it was moist. There was all this collection of water there. And instead of going with it, we wanted to put in a pond and use what we had. The clients wanted to drain it. And this was, over 20 years ago, before permaculture was in our brain. And that's the route we went, but it cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars to do it. And, it worked, but I would not be going there again. So hence the various layers, or the various parts of that design protocol that you're going to learn about, they not only make it easier for you to work with the project site, in terms of using the resources there, but they just make it way easier, period. Because once you've established your water system, everything seems to start falling into place. There's obvious where you would put gardens. It's the same with the farm planning that we do. It has many, many layers, and they all have, if you wanted, you could look up P.A. Yeoman's scale of permanence. And that is roughly what the Regrarium platform was based on. And it's going through different pieces of your landscape and how hard it is to change those. So it's way harder to change climate than it would be soil. This is an example. And through that process, it's fascinating, because once you get into that water layer, again, the whole landscape gets built around it. And that includes access, which is roadways, and then forestry or fencing. And those come all before buildings, right? So you think about people buying property. What is the first thing they do? They pick where they want to put their house. Where I live, the previous owner built the house in a spot which would have been a beautiful spot to put a pond and collect water, but they put it in a place they wanted to maximize a view, which, has all sorts of negatives attached to that. So Grady had a question here. Sorry, Grady. How detailed should you get? One of the backyard of the urban space is overgrown. Should you include structures and plants you only intend to keep? Yeah, I would do your best to include as much as you can, Grady. So if you have big swaths of blackberries, you can just, roughly indicate where they are, and not to worry. As we go through the process, you'll continue to show existing plant material, but obviously that you're going to overlay with whatever you feel is desired for that spot. So base map is really about what's happening right now, and we do want to include significant plants. So if you have, an asparagus or, smaller herbaceous plants, maybe on an urban site, you want to indicate a little bit of that. But when we go about this, we're just looking at significant trees and shrubs, even small shrubs that have been added. I don't even, I'll make a list of what they are, but I don't get too hung up on their location and what the action is, because often they don't make the cut, unless client says, yes, I got to have that. But, and that's ultimately their decision. But that's how I would approach. And that would be more so for the base map, Grady. So what you're going to show us with the design site is going to be kind of general, right? So if we go back, so just some Google Earth images, the property boundary. This is all really helpful info to have. Your design site location, the coordinates. If you don't want to reveal where your site is, that's completely fine. You can keep that private. Just let me know in a note or something, because what I often will do is I'll fire up Google Earth Pro if I'm wanting to check something out on your site. So with every design sheet, if we have the location and the coordinates, it makes it really easy for me to do that, and I'm more likely to do it, right? I think in my note that I sent out, I encouraged everybody to build their project. So each week, we'd like you to include last week's work. So by the time we get to the end of here, we'll just zoom ahead a little bit. Let's say we were looking at the water map. If there's some question here, I can zip back. Let's say your water flow analysis, you might have your 24-hour maximum rain event. And if that didn't look right, I could, zip back into your climate section and take a look at that just to make sure that the number matches up. In here, I didn't find a number, but we definitely want to include that for sure. And let's see here. I think we got your questions, Ruben. Does anybody else have anything that they want to ask about for this this upcoming lesson, or any thoughts?
I was curious when I work at a plant nursery, so it's really easy for me to get access to plants to start up my design. So I was wondering at what point in our lessons should I start investing in getting more plants for the site, like native perennials and pollinators and stuff like that. And there's already a lot of them established on the site that I planted a couple years back, and I've been away from the site for a couple of years. So it's kind of, some things have really naturalized and other things have kind of gone away. So,
Right.
yeah.
Well, that's a good question. Well, believe it or not, most of our clients, when we are talking to them initially, they want to talk about plants. And I wouldn't, for yourself, with the course here, we're really not going to get into plant material until we get into week 8. And there's a good reason for that. I mean, they're the icing on the cake. There's no doubt of that. But there's so many important steps before we start looking at plants that I would encourage you to really dial into the site analysis section that we're going to be going through, and that starts with the base map. And once we've done the base map, we're going to look at, zones and sectors and microclimates. And those are really important parts of the initial permaculture design process. So we really want to get a good handle on the project site before we start deciding what plant goes where. And the same with the water, right? You may have passive rainwater, you may have a rain garden planned for an area, which is often something I will encourage people to look at with their water designs. And it's often a great thing to put in an urban garden, providing your soils are correct. But if you do have a rain garden in place, obviously that's going to completely change what plant material would be appropriate for that space, right? So yeah, I hope that helps you, Grady. And you're lucky you're surrounded by plants in your job, and that's how I got into it. I got pulled into the plant world working with mentally handicapped folks. I don't know, 38 years ago or something crazy, and it just pulled me in, and I discovered I like to work with plants more than mentally handicapped folks. So I sourced out a way I could continue on that career. So yeah, so it's a great place to start. And knowing your plants is an ongoing thing. The more and more you learn, the better. Yeah. Oh, Ruben, you got a question?
Yes. So my question was earlier when you were talking about Vectorworks Landmark, you made a comment. You said it will couple with other programs. And the next thing you said was the QGIS, more information, you can import LiDAR information, right? So my question there is the QGIS a separate program? Is that just the format that you use to import the LiDAR? It is the
No,
format?
if you Google QGIS, you'll see it's an open source software, so completely free. However, you then have to learn it, and that's the tricky part. Luckily, I'm in a course, or have been in a course on that. That's been really helpful. So saved on the software cost and spending it on the education part, learning it. It's not that intuitive to me, but yeah, that's just in kind of you wouldn't really have to use that in urban mapping. I don't think it would really be that helpful, but
Okay.
for larger scale it is. So yeah, does that answer your question? All right.
Yes, and the only other thing I want to say was your code, the U, I wish that was in the videos because I just went back and did mine. I've done them all, and the U, I was not on top. I tried, but I was not.
Well,
That was really helpful.
okay, sorry, I missed part of that.
When you said, hit U on Google Earth to get the top view, yeah. So I've made my base map, and it's not from top view, so it needs to be redone.
I see. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty common to point out to people because it's with base plans, you definitely want 2D overhead, because as soon as you get into a perspective view, the further you get away, the scaling doesn't work, right? So we want to have a scaled drawing ultimately. Yeah. Yeah. Is there any other questions from anybody today? No, we're all good. Yeah, well, that's great. Well, I hope that my introduction here has given you a few little tips to make the next week or two a little bit easier for yourself. And I'll be posting this video again on that discussion board. And if you do run into any trouble, there's the Q&A. There is a Q&A discussion board that you can post any question in. You can send me a note through the inbox. I'm probably on the course, 4 or 5 times a week, but really, heavily on Monday and Tuesday. So it may take a few days to reply, but do my best to get back to you as quickly as possible. So I hope everybody has a great week, and looking forward to seeing your assignments. And then the following week, well, next week is your assignment will be due, and then the following week we'll have another Q&A on the base map itself, and we'll go through some of the things we touched on today, but we'll really dial into, how to make a nice base map, whether it's CAD or hand drawn, and then how we're going to build on top of that. So yeah, so thank you very much, everybody, for attending, and we'll look forward to seeing your assignments next week. So you take care, and thanks again.
Thank you.
Jamie.